Good afternoon. I welcome everybody who joins us. My name is Olga Atamanova, and Ukraine Media Center continues its operation today. And now, let me introduce our guest. Is Taras Kremin, Commissioner for the Protection of the State Language, and today we will be discussing the law of Ukraine on ensuring the functioning of Ukrainian as the state language, and specifically these days, 5 years ago, the law has come into force. It was published, and now we will be talking to what extent it is already in effect. What are the results of its implementation? So, Mr. Taras, the floor is yours, and I'm asking our technical team to put the presentation on the screen. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Regardless the air raid alert and those threats that we're facing within the last 10 years, when the missile and the rocket strikes are destroying the people of Ukraine, the fact that was condemned by the large democracies. We're talking about the genocide of Ukrainian people, but the discussion of the law on ensuring the functioning of Ukrainian as the state language is about those peaks that we were able to achieve. One of those acts that we pay a lot of attention to, and in my opinion, is probably one of the most important, if not the most important, within the years of Ukrainian independence, because the matter of popularization of Ukrainian language as the state language and the rights of the citizens of Ukraine to obtain services in Ukrainian language is the constitutional right identified by the Article 10 of the Constitution, which gained specific sounding after the adoption of the law. So basically, our today's briefing is dedicated to those achievements that we've got within those 5 years, specifically during the war. And it's about the tasks that we set for ourselves as the Office of the Commissioner and a huge resilient nation. So on the 16th of July 2019, this law had become one of the most popular, and it gained the attention not only of our international partners, Fifth Column, the Ukrainian society, but also the enemies of Ukraine, because the application of the Ukrainian language as it was stipulated by the law, those statements, the provisions, they were worded in a modern and civilized way. And our task was to prepare for the implementation of all of those articles. I can only say that this law, just like Ukrainian language, not only used to play, but continues playing an increasingly growing role in consolidation of Ukrainian society, in establishment of the state language, and obviously for the resilience of Ukrainian state, because the matter of Ukrainian language, of the state language, is the matter of our security, defense, and national identity. I would like to say that in compliance with the law, there were 2 language institutions established. Never ever in Ukraine there was an office of the Commissioner for the Protection of the State Language, and on my shoulders and shoulders of our secretariat that I really appreciate, we are vested 2 tasks: the protection of Ukrainian language as the state language and the protection of the right of Ukrainian citizens to obtain services in Ukrainian language as a state language. And the State Committee for Standards of Ukrainian Language, organization of which was improved in year 2019, on top of testing of Ukraine and examination of knowledge of Ukrainian language, they are vested yet another task of development of standards and development of terminology, and now legal terminology is being discussed. Also, National Committee is vested a responsibility of suggesting potential changes for Ukrainian orthography, and if any issues arise, National Committee is supposed to respond to those issues. We know that more than 40,000 people have obtained the certificate in Ukrainian language that allowed them to take different positions, directors of school, in law enforcement, or either they may be the citizens of other countries who were able to obtain Ukrainian citizenship, and their knowledge of Ukrainian language complies with the requirements of these difficult times. So within those 5 years, the law has passed 8 waves of implementation. The most of the articles came into force on 16th of July 2019. The list of them is contained in the main document, and we've all felt it. But it's important to mention that the law is written in such a way that every half a year another article was coming into effect that was preceded by information campaign, and obviously inevitability of those events that would actualize slow, gradual, smooth transition to Ukrainian language. For example, on the 16th of January 2020, Article 32 came into effect that contemplates the use of Ukrainian language in transportation and healthcare spheres. And the same is about another articles that I would like to discuss today. So here's the list of all those ways that we've already felt and that we keep sensing until this day. Another important component of the language law contemplates that every citizen of Ukraine is supposed to easily speak Ukrainian language. So it's not only about the rights but also obligations and responsibilities, because Ukrainian language is one of the components of Ukrainian citizenship and identity. So talking about this article that came into effect 4 years ago, in compliance with it, the language of advertisement is supposed to be the state language. Let me avoid reminding you the way it was looking before, but now for advertising, Ukrainian language is the only required language, and the same applies to printed media, the same applies to advertisement in television and radio, and the same applies to those media issued in one of the languages of European Union. So placement of advertisement in printed media and the use of Ukrainian language is guaranteed by the language law. Talking about the following waves, for example, the language of science. It's no secret that the language of publications, dissertations, and scientific academia events, specifically the research of technologies, all of those documents should come in Ukrainian language. This is why scientific books can, on top of state language, be published in the languages of European Union. Also, the certification for PhD should be happening in either state or English language if it's consented for by the participants of the event. Talking about the technical documents, design documents, obviously we have to mention Article 31. So everything related to project and technical documentation, everything as identified by the language law should be common in the national state language. The same applies to the healthcare sphere, which provide the services, results of the tests. Everything that is related to the patients should be common in Ukrainian language. We're talking about the medical services, medical aid, but again, in medical services, other language may be used other than the state language upon consent of the parties. For what I know, in the majority of the cases in the area of the healthcare, the state language is prevailing. The same applies to medical equipment, medicines, documentation for supplementary documentation for which should be common in Ukrainian language. Also important is implementation of the law in the area of transportation. We're talking about the maritime, land, air transportation, all types of transports that are used or maybe temporarily not used by the Ukrainian citizens. This is why The use of Ukrainian language in the transportation sector is guaranteed by the Article 36, and this article came into force 4 years ago. It's important to mention that in current conditions and within all the latest years, very important processes are underway in the area of translation, of bringing the names of the objects of transport infrastructure in compliance with the language law. I'm talking about the airports, railway stations. They should be all in Ukrainian language. We know dozens of examples of decolonization of railway stations. We know about Ukrainization inside of the transport. I'm talking about the mandatory use of the transport personnel. I mean, their use of Ukrainian language. But again, let me emphasize, Ukrainian language is mandatory everywhere in the transport sector in Ukraine. So let's not forget about the application of Ukrainian language in the document circulation. That was the third wave. So here we're talking about the civil unions, political parties, statutory documents of legal entities, and the notifications that are being sent from one agency to another. So regardless of the form of ownership, it applies to all of the institutions. Let's not forget how resonant was Article 30 that contemplates the mandatory use of Ukrainian language in the service area. We've done colossal but very extensive information campaign, and our secretariat mobilized incredible resources to work with this huge sphere on the levels of local governments and central government, huge trade chains, and obviously the establishments and institutions that provide relevant services. So once again, I would like to emphasize that the level in, the language of service sphere should be the state language. All of the services should be provided providing the information to the customers in Ukrainian language. It's about the websites and catalogs who are supposed to have the starting page in the Ukrainian language. Let's not forget that Russian propaganda was using Article 30 in their misinformation campaigns. It's like you won't be able to use any other language other than Ukrainian, but Article 30 contemplates the use of another language upon consent of the parties. For example, during the service of our foreign guests, if the services are taking place or being provided in the places of compact dwelling of the national minorities, but again, only upon the consent of both parties. This article has become a cornerstone in establishment of Ukrainian language as the state language and popularization of the language law. Starting from the 16th of January 2021, we started actively implementing our policies, the policies of our activities, to make sure that the local language programs are developing along with the language training courses for the service sector and for all those who wish to attend such courses, whether they're communal enterprises or trade chains, representative offices of foreign companies working in Ukraine, where the additional information campaign was launched. We've organized the additional Ukrainian language training courses, and the network and the infrastructure is growing. I would like to thank the representatives of the civil society, civil actors, prominent Ukrainian musicians, representatives of the culture sphere who joined our initiative and with whose support we were able to prepare the advertising materials that were disseminated in the leading TV channels of Ukraine, that were disseminated in the big screens all across Ukraine about the importance of use of Ukrainian language in the service sector. Here on the screen you can see prominent musicians and actors who demonstrate that, for example, in the service sector, in the bookstores, in providing services in the trade chains, Ukrainian language is mandatory. And using Article 30, we were really able to implement the concept of smooth Ukrainization, where on one hand we create the conditions for transition to Ukrainian. We've suggested 10 steps for transition into Ukrainian, from switching the mobile devices into Ukrainian language, from auditions, reading Ukrainian books, talking to foreigners, and preparation by the way of use of the training literature. So Article 30, based on the active position of the citizens of Ukraine, provided the momentum for the establishment of the language and protection of the right of all of the citizens who use Ukrainian language in their everyday life. So starting from this date, we've started the exams for in the area of the national language, and using those exams we were able to reset the operations of the government institutions, both central and local government, and in that way we've passed a test, Ukrainian language test. Well, basically we all speak Ukrainian, but it's yet another test that additionally tested the competences of the government officials, so this certificate has no expiration term. As you obtain it, you don't have to pass the test once again, but the law sets forth that if the level of Ukrainian language does not comply with their requirement, the next opportunity will come on the 5th month after the first test. But based on our experience, I can say that those who repeatedly pass the test come in smaller and smaller numbers. So within the first year of the test, the certificate was issued to more than 126,000 citizens of Ukraine. That's a record statistics. In year 23, that number was about 73,000, and in year 22, only 62. It's important to mention indicators like this. Those are the indicators that bring us closer to European standards. And I want to mention that in all European countries, there are institutions that organize the tests, the language tests for the citizens of their countries and those who want to obtain the citizenship of those countries. So again, that's one of the steps that brings us closer to the European community. Regardless of the difficulty of implementation of Article 23 that identified the implementation of Ukrainian language in the culture sphere, the concerts, show programs, art events that were used before, that were going on before the full-scale invasion, but here we're talking about the plays in communal and state theaters, and in case the plays were played in non-Ukrainian language, the translation would be mandatory. And again, it applies to the posters and different information products that supplement the art or demonstration activities, and the same applies to the tickets. And it's no surprise that today tickets, just like other items that I've mentioned, are printed in Ukrainian language. That's the standard stipulated by the law. The citizens of Ukraine want this trend to be preserved. So let's not forget that Ukraine became mandatory for demonstration of the movies. It all applies to the feature movies, documentaries, serial shows. And before the implementation of this article, we could see shows or movies that were enjoyed by the citizens of Ukraine but still being demonstrated in other languages. For the time being, such violations do not exist. But again, during specific film festivals, it's allowed to demonstrate specific movies in non-state language, but their number should not exceed 10%. And in case of such translation, it should be supplemented by subtitles. It also applies to the law that was recently adopted about the English language. The 10% of the movies may be demonstrated in the movie theaters in English language. This is the way to popularize the English language of Ukraine. But let's proceed to another wave that gained weight in the area of publishing. This process was not regulated, and some fraction of the publishing houses were selling books in Ukrainian language. But this Article 26, the law identified that at least 50% of the books issued during the year, published during the year, should be in Ukrainian language. And in coordination with the Literature Chamber, we continue exercising annual monitorings and compliance with Article 26 of the language law. We've held such monitorings for a number of times. We were visiting bookstores and publishing houses all across Ukraine, and in cases of violation, we exercise government control and implement sanctions, about which we report on our official website and during these or those public events. So let me remind you that during the year of the full-scale invasion, we had 2 waves of the articles of the language law coming into force. So basically 1 month before the full-scale invasion, the Ukrainian language has become mandatory for all of the printed media of the national level. So again, Article 25 gave an incredible momentum for the support of the rights and protection of the rights of the citizens for use of their Ukrainian language in printed media. But again, let me emphasize that the printing may be done or printed media may be issued in other language in case it's supported by the copy in Ukrainian language issued on the very same day. We were mentioning this fact a number of times, and we've exercised relevant monitorings. On the 16th of July 2022, when half of Ukraine was burning and heroic Ukrainian armed forces were defending our homeland, some more articles came into force, and the changes to the administrative code of Ukraine came into effect, that allowed the office of the commissioner to penalize the entities in Ukraine. And talking about the warning, it's like a football yellow card. So talking about the warning, we require to mitigate the violation, and if the violation is not rectified, the representative of the office of the commissioner may penalize an entity and the penalty is coming into the amount of from 3,400, and the maximum is unrestricted. So the first penalty is from 3,400 up to 8,500, and the repeated violation is penalized in amount of 8,500 hryvnias and above. So we don't have any examples of the third violation, but the code is in effect, the amendments are in effect. We continue implementing our work, and we use the mechanisms identified by the law to prevent or penalize these or those violators whose numbers are decreasing. And let me mention that we maintain our statistics. We have a number of information inquiries about the number of sanctions, a number of penalties, but our work is not only regulated by those facts, but also by preventive work, information campaigns, and other activities that contemplate coming up with a ruling on administrative violations. Comparing to the years 22-23, the statistics within the first half a year of 2024 is absolutely different, and it is such that demonstrates our institutional capacity. We learned how to use the code on administrative violations. We can prevent some of the violations potentially, and we actively work with all of the entities, business entities. On one hand, we help them understand and comply with the law, and under other conditions, we penalize those who during the work continue violating the language law. So we work in compliance with the administrative code, and we rely upon the rights and requirements of all of the citizens of Ukraine. On the 16th of July 2022, Ukrainian language has become mandatory for the start pages of the internet resources. I'm talking about the interfaces of the websites and applications that by default should be loaded in Ukrainian language. Well, basically, there was a number of web resources who did not have that start page. Unfortunately, the situation remains like this until now, and our statistics within the half a year of the year 2024 says that the sphere of the internet and interfaces of applications are not yet translated to Ukrainian language. For example, out of 1,162 reports that we've got within the first half of year 24, major fraction is related to the violation of this specific provision. And we work with all of the ministries, civil organizations who help us to prevent such actions. We actively work with the segment of the business entities, trying to convince them about the importance of complying with the rights of the citizens of Ukraine. And today, on the 16th of July 2024, Ukrainian language has become mandatory for the printed media of the regional level. So the Article 25 contemplates the availability of versions of printed media in Ukraine provided in Ukrainian language, and that format is mandatory. I want to emphasize, if there are printed media that were issued or continue being issued in non-state language, they are supposed to be supplemented by a copy in Ukrainian language with the same content, the same font size, and to be issued on the same day and to be disseminated in the same areas. It all applies even to subscriptions of the regional printed media in Ukraine. I know that some of them resume their operations in the south and east of Ukraine, and I'm sure they will ensure the compliance with the rights of the citizens to obtain information in the state language. And in the points of sales, at least 50% should be disseminated in the Ukrainian language. So regardless of the region, regardless of the place, I mean, no matter whether it's a gas station or a kiosk in the west or south of Ukraine, or it's a point of sale near a metro station, they should have at least 50% of the regional level printed media published in Ukrainian language. Otherwise, it's a violation, and we urge all of the citizens of Ukraine to report to us using all means possible. And I would like to emphasize that this article has a specific expression in terms of coverage the needs of the indigenous peoples or national minorities. So those requirements do not cover those printed media that are printed specifically in the languages of the indigenous populations or in the languages of national minorities. The list of such languages is approved by the relevant government agency, and as the law had come into force on 16th of July 2019, and as a result of implementation of 8 waves of the law and in the conditions of the full-scale invasion, the majority of the citizens of Ukraine, that's the fact confirmed by the social surveys, that they say that the majority of the citizens of Ukraine use Ukrainian language in their everyday life. About 79% of them, they use Ukrainian language in their daily routines, both at home and at work. That's an unprecedented indicator within all of the years of Ukrainian independence. Yet another important document for establishment of Ukrainian language and the constitutional nature of the language law was the resolution of the Constitutional Court of Ukraine as of 14th of July 2022 that recognized the constitutional nature of the language law. And it also covers the issues of Russian propaganda, political construct of Russian-speaking citizens, and constitutional construing of the Charter on minorities language, and it covers the issues of importance of Ukrainian language and threat to Ukrainian language means the threat to national security. And I recommend everybody to use this resolution because this document is incredibly important for the protection of the national interest, for the popularization of Ukrainian language and fighting with those residues of colonial past that are still preserved in Ukraine, unfortunately. And one of the elements of the language law is the adoption by the government on the 15th of March 2024 of the state language program. We identify it as one of the factors of the national security, but this program is in effect for a little more than 3 months, and among the priorities identified by this document that is dealing with the implementation of Ukrainian language is all of the spheres of our life are unprecedented actions, among which I would like to mention the launch of free state language course for the citizens of Ukraine as it's stipulated by the Articles 5 and 6 of the language law, implementation of the pilot project Ukrainian language as an official language of the European Union and our way to European Union and NATO that was set forth in the Constitution is about Ukrainian gaining the status of the official language of EU, which means it will be the official language of document circulation and communication, and the use of the Ukrainian language by the European Parliament deputies, including those representing Ukraine, and implementation of Ukrainian terminology, development of incredible number of education courses for the children, for the elderly, and obviously for the Ukrainians abroad who needs relevant support in exercising of their language rights as they are set forth in the language law. And we cannot help but mention a number of historic resolutions. For example, European Court for Human Rights resolved that Russia in the temporarily occupied territories is committing linguicide, and they try to supplant the Ukrainian language from there. They mention it as threatening, and I would like to thank the input of the representatives of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Civil Rights Organizations, Office of Prosecutor's General, Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who fight linguicide and condemn their relevant activities in temporary occupation. But again, let me remind you of the International Criminal Court and the issue of arrest orders for Ukrainian, in the name of Russian perpetrators, Russian criminals. On one hand, it was related to the support of Ukrainian language as new opportunities for popularization of Ukrainian language abroad, and from the following year, Ukrainian language will be guaranteed for our students and teachers abroad, and we wait for the results of this fruitful cooperation on the international level and ensuring the right of Ukrainians to obtain information in Ukrainian language abroad, and also the implementation of Ukrainian language in education sphere in terms of nostrification of Ukrainian diplomas or other education certificates that were obtained in Ukraine but that can be translated in the languages of European Union in the issues of the further professional development of the citizens of Ukraine. So these and other international documents are incredibly necessary for establishment of Ukrainian language as language of international communication and protection of the language rights of the Ukrainians. I will not stop on the structure of the reports, but I just need to mention that there are still violations in the area of websites and internet shops. 1/3 of all of the reports that we received last year, and violations in the service sector, in the sector of advertisement, and also the reports were coming from education sector and other specific sector services. So in terms of implementation of Ukrainian language, we were not standing with the hands in the pocket, so to say. We've urged local governments and civil organizations to approve the regional language programs and to expand the network of free language courses for everybody who desires to switch to Ukrainian or to improve their language skills. So I would like to say that among the leaders by number of language courses is Kyiv in Kyiv region, Lviv region, Transcarpathia, Dnipro region, and a number of other regions of the south and east of Ukraine, which is incredibly important for us. The training courses work. They enjoy popularity among the local population, internally displaced persons, foreign students, and other citizens who keep coming to Ukraine and use the opportunity to master Ukrainian language. We've developed such a map of language training programs, and there is no single region where the regional program would not have been established. We're talking about the local and central courses. The largest part of them is in the south and east of Ukraine. All of the communities, including those in temporary occupation, have language training courses. All of the communities in Mykolaiv region and shortly in Sumy, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, the same programs are about to be established. They play incredibly important role. They envisage specific training courses, and the costs forwarded at issue of some cultural products, establishment of the committees that exercise monitoring in the area of the service sector surveillance is incredibly important. Regional language policy that is being analyzed by us, and we work and help to protect Ukrainian language and to have it approved in all levels. Once again, 5 years anniversary of the language law is about the national interests, it's about our national identity, it's about our national security and defense. In fact, I want to express my appreciation of everybody's efforts on behalf of Secretariat of the Commissioner, for those who develop the courses, for those who submit reports and complaints to us, who signals, who requires to switch to Ukrainian, who makes interest in media products, those who actively research social networks, those who come up with art products in Ukrainian language, those who increase the Ukrainian language contact amount in the social media. They all help us to get established as Ukrainian nation. So hopefully this presentation and our conversation dedicated to the 5-year anniversary of the language law will be of effect. Well, thank you. I'm open to all of your questions. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Taras, for such an extensive report. 5 years of implementation of the language law. Well, and I feel saddened because we cannot say that this law is 10 or 15 years old, and I have this feeling if there would be a different period that we would be discussing, the challenges we have would be different too. Well, I would like to ask you a couple of questions regarding the compliance with this law, the language law. We've seen that in a number of areas it was launched, from which period this or those provisions came into force. So for the time being, let's try to mention in which sector the number of violations is the biggest, and in your opinion, which sectors are the best in terms of compliance with the law. Well, based upon the results of the complaints that we get within those years and about the results of our surveillance and monitoring, recently, the team of the Secretariat was visiting Chernivtsi region in the places of compact dwelling of the national minorities. We were monitoring the situation in Odessa region and Kyiv. We have representatives in different regions of Ukraine, but we want our representatives to be in every region of Ukraine. Unfortunately, we only have 4 of them in the southeast in Kyiv. And I would like to have Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Transcarpathia, Lviv, and obviously other corners of Ukraine included. Obviously, the violations should be discussed. I mean, in context of the biggest sectors. Well, obviously, the biggest sector is the internet sector, and I don't know whether it's thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of the websites who provide different services, but again, it's all regulated by this law, and we do a tremendous job to stimulate the service providers in the internet to launch their start page in Ukrainian language. This work is underway, and relevant discussions are happening every week, and we can observe this dynamic. Obviously, it's also about the service sector, small and medium-sized businesses. They resume their operations. Not all of them can comply with the requirements of the law, and unfortunately it results in violation, and we mention it as well. Unfortunately, we still continue to document the violation of the language law in the sector of advertisement. There are task forces established in all corners of Ukraine which examine such advertisement that result in reports to our office. There are civil initiatives in Kherson, Mykolaiv, Odessa, obviously in Kyiv, Kharkiv, and it yields relevant result. But I urge the local governments to be more active, not to wait for the complaints to come, but rather to suggest to their subordinates to ensure the right of Ukrainians to use the Ukrainian language in advertisement sector. Talking about the academic sector, we have questions too. Recently, we were presenting the results of a survey in coordination with the Service for Assessment of Education Quality. I mean, both teachers and students use non-Ukrainian language in their everyday life, both at home and at work. And Talking about the education sector, we're talking here about the schools, including those working in remote education mode. I'm talking about the professional colleges and universities. And based upon the results of our monitoring, we were able to prepare some additional recommendations that I believe will be all used and implemented until the beginning of curriculum year all across Ukraine. Thank you very much, dear friends. Do we have any questions on the floor? I'm having one question remaining. We understand that the provision of the law that regulates the activity of the printed media is coming into effect. I'm sure you were preparing for this. You were exercising probably some preliminary monitoring. Do we still really have printed media in Ukraine that are published in Russian? Well, we've reviewed it on a large scale because we're talking about the regional printed media that continue being published in a language other than Ukrainian. So a lot of media have just disappeared. We remember popular newspapers that were issued on the regional level. Now, unfortunately, probably even due to the war, the resumption of their operations is being funded by the local governments or foreign donors, but the number of the printed media that continue being printed in violation of the language law was not identified by us. But again, printed media not are only those that are printed in Ukrainian, but those which can be published in the language of the national minority. So Article 25 is about the comprehensive European approach to printed media of the regional level, and those results will be promulgated by us as soon as we fulfill relevant monitoring, regardless of the fact that the article came into force today only, regardless of the fact that the subscription for the second half of the year already is through. We will be promulgating the first results probably after half a year, and we will witness to the Ukrainian society what we were able to make and where we still need support on part of the local governments and media. Thank you very much, sir, for this conversation, and thank you for the interest to this topic. And we continue working together for our victory, and glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.